The ballroom glittered like a corporate postcard, crystal chandeliers, polished marble. 400 executives pretending to relax while calculating net worth in their heads. A jazz trio hummed near the stage. Derek Whitmore swirled his champagne slowly, watching the bubbles rise as if they were quarterly profits. Then he turned and walked straight toward me. He stopped just close enough for the surrounding circle to hear him clearly. His eyes drifted down to my navy suit, the same one I've worn to board reviews, crisis briefings, and acquisition negotiations. "Angela," he said, tilting his glass slightly. "You could have at least dressed like leadership tonight." A few guests chuckled. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. The sound spread controlled. Polite, corporate. I smiled. The party continued. Despite the snow blanketing the streets, "It's really cold where I am. How about where you are listening to this story? What's the temperature right now? And if you're still here, please leave me a lucky number." I'm Angela Hughes, Chief Strategy Officer. I built the operational system that increased our EBITDA by 32% in 3 years. I led the retention strategy that kept 87% of our key managers during the downturn Derek now calls his turnaround. I designed the governance metrics our investors use to measure leadership stability. Derek Whitmore, Interim CEO. 9 months in, known for cutting the training budget by 40%, shutting down 2 regional offices, and spending $3 million on a glossy rebranding campaign while employee trust dropped from 78 to 41. He thinks leadership is optics. I stepped slightly back from the stage lights, letting him enjoy the spotlight. What Derek didn't know was simple. The board had already finished its confidential vote. The chairman approached the microphone, cleared his throat, and said evenly, "Before dessert, we have a leadership announcement." The next part of the story contains some fictional elements and uses AI to clarify the message and enhance the emotional experience. If you empathize, I greatly appreciate it. If not, I hope you have a peaceful evening and a good night's sleep. The laughter from the gala still echoed in my ears. But what truly burned wasn't the joke about my suit. It was the culture Derek had been dismantling for 9 straight months. The humiliation was personal. The damage he caused was systemic. I remember the executive meeting when he leaned back in his chair and said, almost proudly, "Sentiment doesn't show up on a balance sheet." That was his philosophy in a single sentence. Within weeks, he eliminated our 12-year mentorship program, the same one that developed 3 of our current division heads, over 2 quarters. He terminated 63 mid-level managers in the name of lean efficiency. Our employee trust index fell from 78 to 41. 4 major shareholders submitted formal letters, warning the board about governance risk and long-term instability. And yet, Derek kept smiling for the cameras. What he never fully understood was that I had built the company's 360-degree leadership evaluation system years earlier, designed to measure not just financial output, but ethical stewardship, cultural continuity, and executive conduct, when he approved its rollout company-wide. He did so confidently, assuming the metrics would validate him. He liked dashboards. He liked numbers. He believed numbers were obedient. Tonight's gala wasn't just a celebration. It was the scheduled release of the comprehensive leadership review. There was one detail Derek tried to adjust months ago. He requested that we remove the category labeled respectful conduct. The board declined. By the time the evaluation report was finalized, my anger had cooled into something far more useful clarity. Numbers don't smirk, numbers don't flatter, and they certainly don't laugh at navy suits under ballroom lights. The comprehensive 360-degree review was compiled from board members, institutional investors, and senior management across every division. It measured what Derek liked to call intangibles, though ironically, those were the very metrics he dismissed. Leadership integrity, 38 out of 100. Culture, stewardship, 29. Strategic continuity, 44. Each category included weighted commentary, cross-verified by independent governance consultants. No ambiguity, no emotional bias, just data. My composite score, drawn from the same sources and criteria, came in at 91. I didn't celebrate. I reviewed the methodology again, line by line, ensuring the audit trail was airtight. Calm isn't passive, it's disciplined. I knew exactly what these numbers meant in a public company facing investor scrutiny. What Derek didn't know was that two of our largest institutional funds had already placed conditions on continued capital support. They weren't dramatic about it. No threats. Just a clause in their latest correspondence. Future investment would depend on demonstrable improvements in leadership governance and cultural stability. In other words, continuity required change. Yet on stage, Derek continued smiling, basking in applause from guests who assumed this evening was a victory lap. He adjusted his cufflinks, shook hands, posed for photos. Confidence is easy when you haven't read the appendix. I stood near the side curtain, hands loosely folded, watching the orchestra ease into a softer arrangement as dessert plates began circulating. The ballroom felt warm, almost celebratory, predictable. Then the chairman returned to the microphone. His voice was measured, deliberate. Before we conclude tonight's program, I'd like all executive officers to remain after our guests finish dessert. The room didn't react immediately. Why would it? But Derek's smile faltered just slightly as the weight of that request began to register. When the last dessert plates were cleared and the ballroom doors quietly closed, the temperature in the room shifted. The investors stayed seated. The senior executives remained standing along the perimeter. No music, no clinking glasses, just anticipation. I felt none of it. Control, when earned, doesn't tremble. The chairman adjusted the microphone and spoke with deliberate calm. The board has concluded the leadership review. A subtle murmur moved through the remaining guests. Derek stood near the center aisle, posture relaxed, one hand in his pocket. He looked at me briefly and gave a knowing half-smile, the kind reserved for ceremonial acknowledgments. In his mind, this was about recognition, a tribute to service, something polite and non-threatening. "Angela," the chairman said, turning toward me. "Would you please join us on stage?" I walked forward without hesitation. No rush, no theatrics, just measured steps across polished marble. I could feel eyes tracking the movement, recalculating assumptions in real time. Derek leaned slightly toward one of the board members and whispered something that made him grin. "Confidence is loudest right before it breaks." The chairman continued. "Over the past several months, the board has conducted a comprehensive evaluation of executive leadership performance, governance standards, and cultural stewardship." He paused not for effect, but for precision, effective immediately. Angela Hughes is appointed Chief Executive Officer. Silence fell with a physical weight. Conversations stopped mid-breath. Even the catering staff froze near the exit doors. 400 witnesses to a structural correction. Derek's smile didn't disappear instantly. It faltered, recalibrated, then tightened. He leaned closer to the chairman and muttered, "This is a joke. It wasn't." I didn't look at Derek. I looked at the room, the investors who had demanded stability, the senior managers who had endured months of attrition, the board members who had read every data point. The chairman spoke again, voice steady. "Mr. Whitmore's interim contract expires tonight. The board thanks him for his service during the transitional period." There it was. Not a firing, not drama, a contractual conclusion. Derek straightened, color rising in his face. "You can't do this without notice," the chairman replied calmly. "The notice was embedded in the performance clause you signed." I took the microphone, then not to celebrate, but to begin. Control is powerful, but legal truth is final. As I stood on that stage, I didn't need to raise my voice. The contract Derek Whitmore signed 9 months ago was already doing the speaking for me. His agreement was clear, plain English. No hidden traps. Interim leadership subject to performance governance review, including cultural and ethical metrics as defined in Appendix C. Appendix C was the very framework he once dismissed as soft management theory. It outlined measurable standards, retention stability, conduct benchmarks, employee trust variance, and board confidence thresholds. Derek had signed every page. He simply never bothered to read beyond compensation. I didn't fire him. That would have required cause, litigation risk, and spectacle. The board simply chose not to extend an interim contract contingent upon performance. Governance doesn't require anger. It requires documentation. Derek stepped forward, face tightening. I delivered cost efficiency, he said sharply. Margins improved. Operating expenses dropped. I held his gaze. Calm and exact. You also delivered 14 resignations from top engineers in 2 quarters, 3 pending client escalations tied directly to leadership instability, and a 37-point drop in employee trust. Numbers. Again. Relentless and unemotional. This is political, he snapped. You've been positioning yourself for this. No, I replied evenly. The metrics positioned me. The chairman nodded to General Counsel, who had been standing near the edge of the stage holding a slim binder. Our corporate attorney stepped forward and opened it without drama. In addition, she said, the board received formal complaints regarding executive conduct inconsistent with our code of ethical leadership. Derek scoffed. Anonymous gossip. She turned a page. 2 were signed. 1 included video documentation. The screen behind us flickered briefly. A clip short. Unmistakable. Derek at a regional town hall, laughing while referring to a mid-level manager's concerns as emotional noise. Another excerpt captured his remark at tonight's gala about my suit. The room didn't gasp. It absorbed. This constitutes a breach of the respectful conduct standard outlined in Section 4. Counsel concluded. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It tightened the space around him, clause by clause. For the first time that evening, Derek had nothing left to negotiate. Justice. When it moves, rarely raises its voice, it documents, circulates, and archives. By midnight, the clip from the gala, Derek's comment about my suit, followed by the board's announcement, was already circulating internally through the executive compliance channel. Not leaked, distributed, labeled as part of the official leadership transition record. By 8 the next morning, shareholders received a concise governance risk summary prepared by counsel and approved by the board. It outlined performance metrics, cultural decline indicators, and the contractual basis for non-renewal of the interim CEO agreement. No adjectives, just timestamps, vote counts, and trend data. Public companies survive on transparency. Ambiguity is expensive. Derek, however, was not prepared to exit quietly. Before noon, he requested private calls with 2 senior board members, longtime allies he believed would defend him. I was copied on the scheduling notices, a procedural courtesy that felt almost surgical. Both directors had already voted against extending his contract. They took the calls anyway. The conversations were brief. By early afternoon, Derek's tone shifted from indignant to urgent. He sent a message to the executive group claiming procedural irregularities. Our general counsel responded within minutes, attaching the independent audit confirmation of the leadership review process. Everything had been reviewed, cross-verified, and signed. He began pacing outside the boardroom glass walls, phone pressed tightly to his ear. The confidence he carried at the gala had evaporated into calculation. For the first time, he looked like a man measuring consequences instead of optics. Then the final piece arrived. At 3:17 in the afternoon, our largest institutional investor, holding just over 12% of outstanding shares, sent a formal email to the board and executive leadership. The message was direct. They supported the board's decision, endorsed my appointment as CEO, and requested immediate implementation of a comprehensive culture restoration plan. No drama, just alignment. The email closed with a single sentence: sustainable returns require accountable leadership. Derek read it over my shoulder in silence. Cold justice doesn't celebrate. It settles. Resistance rarely sounds strategic. It sounds desperate. By late afternoon, Derek formally demanded a re-audit of the leadership review, alleging what he called political manipulation, disguised as governance. He delivered the accusation in writing, copying the board, counsel, and external investor representatives. The tone was sharp, calculated, and just controlled enough to appear rational. The board did not argue. They escalated. Within hours, an independent auditing firm, one we had previously retained for compliance validation, was invited to re-examine the entire 360-degree leadership evaluation process. Raw data, weighting formulas, survey authentication logs, and consultant notes were transferred under sealed review. Transparency, when done correctly, is almost clinical. I said nothing publicly. Silence. In that moment. Wasn't weakness. It was leverage. Every statement I didn't make left room for the data to speak without interference. Derek, on the other hand, began calling department heads directly, suggesting the review had been influenced. 2 of them forwarded his messages to legal within minutes. The re-audit concluded 48 hours later. No discrepancies, no statistical distortion, no procedural irregularities. The independent firm issued a written confirmation the evaluation methodology met governance standards and accurately reflected submitted responses. Derek read the summary with a rigid jaw. "This doesn't prove intent," he muttered, as if intent could override documented outcomes. Then the unexpected development surfaced. One of the senior engineers Derek had terminated 6 weeks earlier, David Morales, had since accepted a leadership role at a direct competitor. During the audit follow-up interviews, Morales voluntarily provided documentation of internal communications and recordings from team meetings. They detailed patterns of dismissive language, pressure tactics, and public belittlement that aligned with multiple survey comments about toxic leadership. He wasn't suing, he wasn't retaliating, he was willing to testify, if needed. Regarding workplace conduct, that detail shifted the atmosphere immediately. Governance concerns are manageable. Verified behavioral patterns are not. For the first time since the Gala, Derek's resistance stopped sounding defiant and started sounding cornered. Power doesn't erupt, it consolidates, then lands all at once. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. Doors closed. Council present. Investor observers dialed in remotely. No press, no theatrics, just governance. Derek arrived early, carrying a folder thick enough to suggest preparation. He opened the session with a formal motion, a vote of no confidence against me as newly appointed CEO. His argument centered on procedural overreach and destabilizing leadership optics. He framed himself as the protector of continuity, the misunderstood reformer unfairly displaced. I let him speak uninterrupted. When he finished, the chairman asked if any director wished to second the motion. One hand lifted slowly. Only one. The vote proceeded immediately. 9-1. Not against me. Against him. The room didn't react outwardly. Directors simply marked their ballots and slid them forward. Governance, when executed properly, feels almost sterile. The chairman folded his hands and delivered the decision without inflection. Mr. Whitmore is relieved of executive duties, effective immediately, for a brief second. Derek didn't move. Then his palm struck the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. "You're making a mistake," he snapped, voice finely stripped of polish. I met his eyes evenly. "No," I said. "We're correcting one." The legal counsel leaned forward to clarify the administrative next steps, access privileges suspended, transition protocol activated, communications to be drafted within the hour. Derek attempted one final maneuver, referencing his severance protections and executive benefits. Counsel responded calmly, sliding a single page across the table. Section 7. She said, "Compensation limitations apply in cases of documented performance failure tied to governance review outcomes. The independent audit findings, the cultural breach documentation, and the non-renewal classification triggered that clause automatically." His severance package, once substantial, was now contractually reduced. Derek stared at the page as if it had rewritten itself. The explosion he expected never came. No shouting match, no dramatic escort, just a vote, a clause, and a correction entered permanently into the record. Collapse rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. It unfolds in notifications, headlines, and calendar cancellations within 24 hours of the board's announcement. Derek's departure was circulating across LinkedIn and two major financial outlets. The articles were restrained, but precise interim CEO contract concludes following governance review. In corporate language, that phrasing carries weight. By the next morning, speculation had already filled the gaps. Analysts referenced declining employee trust metrics and investor pressure for cultural stability. Derek attempted a brief post on his profile, thanking the board for the opportunity to serve. The comments section did not cooperate. Former employees began sharing carefully worded accounts of restructuring fatigue and leadership volatility. Nothing defamatory, just consistent. Then came the quieter consequences. Two companies that had been in advanced discussions with him for chief executive roles withdrew their invitations within the same week. One cited alignment concerns. The other simply wished him well. Reputation in executive circles is less about what is said publicly and more about what is whispered privately. The contractual reduction of his severance package became official once performance failure was formally logged under governance review standards. 70% of the projected compensation was eliminated under Section 7. There was no negotiation window. The clause was automatic. Late Friday evening, I received a single email from Derek. No greeting. You orchestrated this. I read it once. Then I archived it. There was nothing to defend. The board initiated the review. The independent auditors validated it. Investors reinforced it. The contract executed it. I had simply built the system years earlier. On Monday morning, the market responded. Within 48 hours of the leadership transition announcement, our stock price rose 11%. Analysts attributed the surge to restored governance confidence and projected retention stabilization. Capital favors predictability. I watched the ticker update in real time. Not with triumph, but with recognition. When structures are transparent, consequences don't feel personal, they feel inevitable. The morning after the vote, the building felt different, not louder, not celebratory, just steadier. I arrived before 8, as I always had, carrying the same leather portfolio I'd used for years. The glass doors opened with their usual mechanical hum. No spotlight, no orchestra, just fluorescent lights and the quiet rhythm of a company returning to balance. As I stepped into the executive hallway, a young analyst from the strategy team paused near the coffee station. She looked at me for a second, then smiled. Nice suit. Angela. I glanced down at the navy fabric Derek had mocked less than 12 hours earlier. I smiled back. I've had it since I started here, and that was the point. Leadership isn't the jacket, it's the work done while wearing it. It's the decisions made when nobody's applauding. For 17 years, I built systems that outlast personalities, retention frameworks, governance metrics, performance reviews that measure conduct as carefully as profit. Those structures didn't humiliate Derek, they evaluated him. As I walked into my office, I reviewed the transition checklist investor calls scheduled, culture restoration plan drafted, executive listening sessions arranged. No dramatic purge, no revenge tour, just correction. Real leadership doesn't require stage lights. It requires accountability. Culture is not a line item to trim when margins tighten. It's the infrastructure that holds margins together when markets shake. Derek believed respect was sentimental. The board recognized it as strategic capital. By mid-morning, emails from employees began arriving, brief notes, cautious optimism, a few simple thank yous. Not for removing him, for stabilizing them. Derek wasn't destroyed by me. He was removed by a transparent governance system he underestimated. Contracts enforced themselves. Metrics spoke clearly. Investors responded rationally. Cold justice isn't theatrical. It doesn't cheer. It simply restores equilibrium. And as I settled into the chair that now officially carried my name, I realized something steady and undeniable: respect, once institutionalized, is the most valuable asset a company can hold. There's something people don't talk about enough in leadership. Humiliation is temporary, but systems are permanent. That night at the gala, I could have reacted. I could have matched Derek's sarcasm with something sharper. Instead, I trusted the structure I had spent years building. The real lesson isn't about revenge, it's about patience, documentation, and integrity. Culture isn't sentimental, it's strategic. Respect isn't soft, it's measurable. And the quiet work you do when no one applauds may one day be the very thing that protects you. If you were in that ballroom, laughed at in front of hundreds of people, what would you have done? Would you fight back instantly or build something strong enough that you never have to? I learned that real power doesn't shout, it prepares. More importantly, leadership is not about winning arguments. It's about protecting people who don't have a microphone. The engineers who resigned, the managers who stayed silent, the employees who wondered if respect still mattered. That's who this story is really for. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Drop your city in the comments. Every place has someone who needs to hear that dignity and discipline still matter in business. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing. One click from you helps these stories reach someone who might be doubting their own worth tonight. A like or share might shift someone's thinking about what leadership should look like. You're not just watching, you're helping restore standards. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.